are continuing our theme this year is timeless wisdom, evolutionary vision, and that's our theme for the month. We're kind of starting that out, looking at what our timeless wisdom is, what our foundation is, and then what our vision is, how we want to go forward. And so today the talk title is Here and Now, Here and Now. So here and now depends on our understanding of how we got here. And of all our present moment is kind of how we got here to the here and now. And so, I want to spend a few minutes contemplating Dr. Martin Luther King's life. Tomorrow is the holiday that's set aside to honor and commemorate his life and his work. And so I was thinking about him and how his story of his life has evolved over the years since his death in 1968. And I was reading an article, it was a review by Christopher Wilson in the Science of Mind magazine, where he reviews a new movie that's out that's called MLK/FBI. And it was directed by Sam Pollard, and it highlights the literal war on Martin Luther King by the FBI under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover. And, it brings to light that over the years, we have created this sort of sanitized idea, literally whitewashing the image of Martin Luther King Jr. We share quotes from him about having love over hate, or judging each other by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And these are all very powerful and important concepts. But it's important to understand that Martin Luther King was a radical activist. He said some pretty strong things, and he was seen as a very dangerous man, especially to the white leaders and the white power structure at the time. And today, we don't realize this. Today, Martin Luther King has about a 90% approval rating, but at the time, he had a very low approval rating, especially, not surprisingly, among the white population. So he was seen as this threat by the FBI. And I'm going to quote Christopher Wilson in his article about this documentary. He says, "It began when King stepped down from the podium at the Lincoln Memorial after giving one of the most famous speeches in national and world history, his I Have a Dream speech," which of course is a speech that we see today as a very unifying and beautiful vision. But Wilson continues, he says, "In this instance, the march brought together more people than had ever participated in such a protest in the nation's history. That iconic moment defines King and the ideal of protest for many Americans. It was also the moment that Hoover and the FBI wrote an urgent memo stating King was, quote, the most dangerous Negro in the future of this nation, and resolved to use every resource at its disposal to destroy him." So this was deeply seated in the propaganda of the dangerous Black man that began in the earliest days of slavery. If you want to understand this, I recommend the documentary 13th that talks about this. And this message, the dangerous Black man, is alive and well and still coming to light today, most blatantly. We've seen in the way that police forces deal with large groups of mostly Black and brown people versus large groups of white people, which we saw again on full display at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. So the film MLK/FBI documents the smear campaign by the FBI that ultimately did reveal some human flaws in a very human person of Martin Luther King. Wilson writes about the director Sam Pollard's reason for making the film. And he said, "Pollard says he made the film in part to show that hero worship is dangerous. When you elevate someone to be an icon, you forget that they're human beings and complex. You forget that King did not do it by himself," he said. But Wilson adds this. He says, "This is unless you remember King and the movement for what they were: committed individuals leading a people's movement non-violently, grasping for the power availed to them against great odds and in the face of persecution and threat, and successfully making changes in the fabric of this nation. That memory of the movement and its leaders is not only more accurate history, but it's also more inspirational. He says, if change can only come through the work of perfect and heroic leaders enshrined in marble monuments, it leaves us waiting for one to arrive. It leaves us waiting for somebody else to do it, right? So the history embracing both the positive and the imperfect, with flawed people struggling against the odds, should tell us that any one person may be able to similarly affect change. And that's what I find inspirational. That's what I want to think about today and tomorrow as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King, to know that change comes through individual effort bound up in collective support. That because we are all connected, we didn't arrive at this here and now alone, right? We arrived together. One of my favorite quotes by Dr. Martin Luther King is shared by Drew Dillinger in his article on MLK in the magazine Common Ground. He quotes Dr. King's Christmas Eve sermon on peace that he delivered in the last months of his life from his pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. And he said, Dr. King said, if we are to have peace on earth, he told his congregation, we must develop a world perspective. Yes, as nations and as individuals, we are interdependent. It really boils down to this, that all life is interdependent. And that's what we teach, right? That this is the real truth, that we know that here and now we are all connected. We talk about how we were connected at that moment of expansion in the Big Bang, and energetically we're all part of each other. And Martin Luther King understanding of this interconnectedness was most likely influenced, or somewhat probably influenced to some extent, by his conversations with the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. So Martin Luther King had correspondence with and met with him a few times, and Thich Nhat Hanh encouraged Dr. King to speak out against the Vietnam War at the time. It was raging in 1967, and King did this. He strikingly did this in one of his speeches called Beyond Vietnam, and he said, you know, we are taking the Black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they are not, that they cannot found Southwest Georgia or in East Harlem. He said, we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of the poor village, but we realize that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. And so he spoke this truth to power, and yet he knew that the true power came from this interconnectedness, from this interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh called it. He coined that word, interbeing, and he describes it in a famous passage in his book, The Heart of Understanding, when he talks about, he says, if you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in the sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there would be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. Without trees, we cannot have paper. So the cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are. Interbeing is a word that is not in the dictionary yet, but if we continue with the prefix inter with a verb to be, we have a new verb, interbe. So in the same way the cloud is in this paper, we are in each other, that we arrived here together, that it brought all of us to this place through our consciousness, through our beliefs, through our ideas, and through our actions. Our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, talked about this. He said, the soul, being the seed of memory, already contains a record of everything that has ever happened to us. These memories as a whole constitute the subjective tendency of the individual life. This tendency can be changed through constant effort and a determined persistency of purpose. The soul life of all people merges more or less, and this creates the soul life of our human race. the collective subjectivity of all humanity called by the sum collective unconsciousness. This collective unconsciousness contains the record of all human events that have ever transpired. We are all connected in this one life, this one consciousness. And he says we're all more or less subject to this collective thought, since it acts as a powerful human race suggestion. And he says the sum total of all erroneous human belief binds until the individual mentality lifts himself up above the law of averages into a higher law of spiritual individualism. So I know that's a lot. That's a big chunk there. But basically what he's saying is that we are subjective to this he called it race consciousness, and he wasn't talking about races, he was talking about human race. So the human race, all of us, all our thoughts, and that we are affected by this thought until we lift ourselves up from this collective unconscious thought. And so what he's talking about is individuals doing this, and that it's very important for each individual to know that you can make a different choice, that we each as individuals can make new choices, that we don't have to go along with what the unconscious, collective unconscious has told us about ourselves. But we can't just stop there. It's really important for us to do that, but we can't just stop there. That we have to realize that we have the power not only to change our own individual conscious, but to contribute now to a new whole collective unconsciousness, to create a new collective story, a new experience. And so I see my part in this is to help us understand the old story, what we have been subjected to, what we have allowed to lead us, so that then we can be aware of how we can create a new story. So when I share a story about Martin Luther King, or highlight the racism and the white supremacy within our law enforcement agencies, I'm not doing it to be divisive, right, in that moment, or to be an angry judgment. Although anger is a very healthy emotion, especially in some instances, like what we've seen in the last week or so. But I have a very specific purpose in doing that. It's in order to bring light to the very real collective consciousness that drive us together, that is part of our interbeing. And when we can do that, when we can open ourselves up and we can make different choices. So Dr. Holmes says this. He says, a race suggestion is a very real thing, and each individual carries around with him or her and has been written into his mentality many impressions which he never consciously thought of or experienced. And that's so important for us, that we haven't consciously thought these things. We have unconsciously been affected by them. He says when we realize that the individual's subjectivity is his use of this one subjective mind, we shall see that the subjective unity is maintained between all people. It's maintained by us. It's maintained by us continuing to be subjected to this truth. And the individual mentalities who are in sympathetic vibration with each other, more or less mingle and receive suggestions from each other. This is the meaning of mental influence, which is indeed a very real thing. Isn't that a great image, that our thoughts are mingling, that our individual mentalities mingle and receive suggestions from each other? It's like a super spreader event, right? In consciousness, that we mingle, our consciousness mingles. And so our job individually and collectively is to change those thoughts, so that when we mingle, we move forward in a more interconnected way, in a more healthy way. So in the great book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, his book on unconscious bias, he says you have to constantly be revising your conclusions. To constantly be revising your conclusions. So we have new stories, we have new ways of learning and being. And so, when I talk about the racism and the white supremacy within our police organization, I have great compassion for those police officers who are doing heroic and amazing things. And I can imagine that those police officers who were a part of this consciousness, this belief that white people gathering weren't dangerous, which is the belief, might be revising their conclusions as they were beaten by American flags, by those waving the banner of Blue Lives Matter. That had to have been the cognitive dissonance of that, has to be a traumatic thing to go through. But wise Black activists throughout the eons have been telling us forever that oppression is harmful to the oppressors. That who do they go after first? Those who don't agree with them, their own. They go after their own that didn't do the bidding, who don't comply with the story. It's bad for all of us. White supremacy and racism is bad for all of us. I first heard that white nationalism and domestic terrorism was our gravest threat to democracy back in probably 1992 when then Attorney General Janet Reno was talking about that. And it's something that was revisited this week by the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, who said that domestic terrorism and white nationalism is our greatest threat. And how far we've come, right? From J. Edgar Hoover saying that our greatest threat was the Black man. Thank God the story's changing. Thank God that in our newsreels, it was brought forward and it was shown. And as painful as it was to see that collective story, it's also a healing moment. There's a healing going on. This is the great news, that which we bring out into the open can be healed. So Holmes says, no matter what may be in the subjective state of our thought, the conscious state can change it. Isn't that a beautiful thing? No matter what is in the subjective state, no matter what we have believed, no matter what has come forward, the conscious state can change it. Being conscious of how we got here and now, we can choose a new idea, a new understanding of our interbeing and our interconnectedness. Our trained thought, that which we choose to look towards, is more powerful than an untrained thought, Dr. Ernest Holmes said. Last night, I was listening to a recording of Dr. Holmes. It was one of his last talks he gave in 1959. It was a dedication to a new church in our movement at that time in Whittier, California. There was, 400, 500 people there. And it's usually referred to as his cosmic consciousness experience, because as he's speaking, you can hear that he has this moment of understanding that the veil is thin, and he says the veil is thin between cosmic consciousness and between us, and he kind of abruptly sits down in that moment. But the talk itself, I mean, we listen to that little part and find that really powerful. But the talk itself is very powerful. He begins his talk. This is in 1959, and he dies in 1960. So this is the very end of his long career and his work to create this movement. And he begins the talk by admitting that he was a restless soul. He says, "I'm a restless soul." That we haven't yet done what we could do in our movement. He talks about the power of a group of people working together. He said, "I am a restless soul. We have not done what we could do in our movement." As he's dedicating this new church, he says, "I know why this church is here. It's here because you are here, because your consciousness has put this together. This is a collective power." He likens it to the weaving of a rope where one strand can hold no weight, but united, woven together, all these strands can hold a terrific amount of weight. He says, what a church body can do if he says, properly trained in our consciousness. He says, to know that there is a law of good, that there's a power in the universe greater than we are, and that we can use it. This is what Ernest Holmes said over and over again. There's a power in the universe. There's a divine presence that moves through us, and that we can use it to create good. We can use it. And he says, through a united consciousness of a group, and an inner conviction, things can change. And he said, the last thing he said is, we have joined our consciousness with the everlasting, eternal life. And he says, I see it. We mingle with the host of heaven. He sees it. And at that point, he said, I'll speak no more. And he sat down. This is a cosmic moment in his life where he knew that there was more to do, and he knew that we had more to do, and that we were so close if we could just continue to know this divine truth. And I stand here today relating to Ernest Holmes, being a restless soul myself, to know the great potential that we have, to have optimism as he had optimism in that moment, to be a restless soul, to know that what we can do, and to know the power that we have. I agree with Dr. Holmes when he said at the end of chapter 4 in How to Use the Science of Mind, how to use it in the Science of Mind text, he says, a new light is coming into the world. We are on the borderland of a new experience. The veil between spirit and matter is very thin. We are very connected. And so this is the truth. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King in 1967 had asked a profound question. And 1967 was a very tumultuous time. 1968 was a very tumultuous time in our world. There was a new awakening around racism and about social justice, and it was a violent time. And he asked a profound question. He said, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? I think this is the choice that we have in this moment as well. Is it chaos or is it community? Are we going to lift ourselves up and collectively know a true story and move forward collectively to healing? So how do we do this? We continue to shed light on the old story. We can't be afraid to talk about that story that has driven us and brought us to this place, on a collective consciousness that drives us and influences us. We have to tell the story, and not just me. We all do. We all have to not be afraid to tell that story, to bring it forward and to highlight it. And then we have to begin to tell a new story, that no matter what we mean in the subjective state, the conscious state can change it. As Ernest Holmes said, the conscious state must now provide a higher contemplation, a spiritual realization which says, I partake of the nature and bounty of all good, and I'm now surrounded by everything which makes life worthwhile. This is the new story, that we are surrounded by this divine presence that allows us to know the truth of who we are in an abundant way in love. I agree with Dr. Holmes when he says that we are a teaching, not a preaching order, a practicing, not a proselytizing order. What he means is that we teach these principles and we practice them. We are a teaching and practicing order. How do we practice them? Through our individual practice of healing, through our meditation, through our affirmative prayers, through our study and understanding of an old story, not being afraid to share a new story, by our circulation of these ideas, by expanding our own individual consciousness that bubbles up into that collective consciousness that creates something new, through our love. We bring ourselves present to this here and now. Dr. Holmes said, no matter what may be in the subjective state of our thought, the conscious state can change it. That's what we're here to do and be. That life lies open, rich, full, and abundant. Let us close our eyes for a moment with me and just take that in. I have only to open the portal of my soul and accept that which is ready to express through me. Where are you ready to let this divine express through you? Today I fling these portals wide. Today I'm an instrument through which life flows. Let us take that in as we affirm the divine truth of nature itself. to know the truth of our being, to claim that interbeingness connects us to that one life, that one power, that universal presence that moves through all things. We are interconnected to that source. And because I'm a part of that, you're a part of that, we are connected. We are connected. And so together we have this wonderful experience and powerful presence to speak our word, to know the truth, to be willing to consciously change the story of our lives, that all deserve equal treatment, that all beings are beautiful expressions of love and light, uniquely showing up in all the colors of the rainbow, all the shades that we uh, are all individualized expression of that one. This is the truth that I know, and I know this truth, and I claim at this very moment. And let us just know the peace and wholeness and harmony throughout our world, and especially within our United States Capitol, and especially during this next few days of inauguration, to step into the peace, that wholeness, to within my own heart, to know that truth, that peace is found in the heart of the divine, and that heart of the divine, as our own psalm says, is within me. I am that peace. We are each that peace. So let us hold that truth and know it and claim it in this moment, that peace resides within us. And let us allow that to ripple forward as we do every week, to know that that peace resides within my heart, and that I can ripple out into my home, into the place where I live, that that peace resides within my home, and that it ripples out and flows out into the streets of your neighborhood and where you are. And it ripples out this peace just expanding, this light expanding to our neighborhoods, to our cities, to our state, and let it flow to the Capitol and to the White House and to the mall and to DC and all that, all the people that are there protecting and standing forward, creating a new story of equality and justice and equity and peace for all, that we go forward in a healing moment in unity and oneness and love. Let us expand this not only to our country where we are in this moment, where I am in this moment, but to the world, to expand this peaceful presence that began in our own very heart, that has expanded like a light, like a candle that continues to be lit by others, and it ripples out to our world and beyond, to this universal presence, this divine essence, this universal power that we can use in this moment. And just reside there, float in that truth of interbeingness with the divine, with each other. And let us flow back to the truth of who we are in this very moment, breathing back through your heart and to your feet into this grounding in this truth, this present moment, this here and now. I am a divine expression of this one, and I choose to consciously create a new story. Let us celebrate this truth together. I'm so grateful to speak it. I'm so grateful to be in this position in this moment to help create a new story of